you love a Satyajit Ray film is like trying to explain the love of your life why you love him. There are too many things to be said, too many details to be gone over, and after a certain point, they all start to sound very repetitive. And you realize no matter what you say, words couldn't possibly do justice to how you feel. And especially what new thing could be said about Pather Panchali. And so many people, way more qualified than me, have done that already. However, the sad reality is, Ray's body of work is largely unknown to the general audience. When you bring up the notion of Indian cinema to people, their minds automatically go to the songs and the dances, the lavish sets, and the larger than life melodramatic affair that Bollywood has unfortunately popularized. Heck, even most people in his homeland haven't sorted out his films. Yes, every Bengali is aware of Satyajit Ray at some level and has probably watched or read something by him, but very few people have done the deep dive and watched the entire filmography. You see, Satyajit Ray arrived at the scene at a time when the Indian film industry was bound by set conventions and heavily dependent on factors that were favorable to commercial valuation of films. He broke away from all these conventions and alleged indispensable set roles, whether it be working with an entire cast of non-actors to shooting the film in natural light. Ray did it all. Funds did not come easy, but you see, that didn't stop Ray. After surmounting all these hurdles came Pather Panchali, a film that revolutionized the Indian cinema. Ray's first and probably the most well-known film, Pather Panchali is a household name and is considered a bona fide international classic that placed Satyajit Ray in the leagues of the all-time greats. Filmmakers from Akira Kurosawa to Martin Scorsese have held it as one of the best movies ever made. So, what is it about Pather Panchali that makes it so?
এরকম যে বাংলায় ছবি হতে পারে, যে রকম ছবি আমরা বিদেশের ছবি দেখতে গেলে পাই, এইটা আমাদের কাছে একদম অভূতপূর্ব ছিল।
But to truly understand the impact of Pather Panchali, first one needs to know the context of how it was made. So quick story time, it is the early 1940s and Ray has started a film society in Calcutta with a couple of his hipster friends, where they mainly view and discuss artsy European and Russian films. Ray was an illustrator at an advertising agency back then, but the idea of making a film of his own had already crossed his mind. But he was not interested in the commercial cinema popular in India back then, which were largely mythological tales filled with broad strokes and multiple music and dance sequences. Ray wanted to tell stories about real people and their real struggles, and Indian cinema to him felt as far removed from reality as possible. It wasn't until he saw Vittorio De Sica's neo-realist Italian film, The Bicycle Thieves, that he identified a cinema style that spoke to him and one he could possibly dabble in. Ray had been playing around with the idea of adapting Bibhuti Bhushan's Pather Panchali for the big screen for a while now, and to shoot it like the neo-realist films made perfect sense to him. In an essay from the book Deep Focus, Ray talks about describing his idea first to the French filmmaker Jacques Renoir, who had come to India to shoot his movie The River. Renoir showed great interest in Ray's pitch and encouraged him to go through with his plan.
We passed through several suburban towns and villages and heard the drums and even had fleeting glimpses of some images. Someone said it would bring us luck. I had my doubts, but I wished to believe it. All who set about making films need luck as much as they need the other things. Talent, money, perseverance, and so on. We needed a little more of it than most.
The production of Pather Panchali was unconventional, to say the least. After deciding on making the film, Ray had to start planning the shoot. He was still working in the advertisement firm, so the movie had to be shot in the weekends strictly. Also, because of the minimalist nature of the film and Ray's inexperience, he couldn't get any financial backing from any investors, and there came a point when he had to part with his rare books and music cassettes and even had to mortgage his wife's gold jewelry. To keep the budget in control, he had to stick with inexperienced technicians, most of whom were working on a film for the first time. He also mostly cast non-actors in prominent roles, keeping in tradition of the neo-realistic films. But Pather Panchali is living and breathing, and you can tell that right from the beginning as the credits roll and the names appear handwritten on a dusty and crumpled piece of paper. It's alive, and it's there for you to witness.
When I look back on the making of Pather Panchali, I cannot be sure whether it has meant more pain to me than pleasure. It is difficult to describe the peculiar torments of a production held up for lack of funds. The long periods of enforced idleness, there were 2 gaps totaling a year and a half, produced nothing but the deepest gloom. The very sight of the scenario is sickening, let alone thoughts of embellishing it with details or brushing up the dialogue. But work, even a day's work, has rewards, not the least of which is the gradual comprehension of the complex and fascinating nature of filmmaking itself.
In an interview, Aparna Sen stated that Satyajit Ray, Pather Panchali, an adaptation of Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay's novel of the same name, very much inspired from Vibhuti Bhushan's own life, is about a family true even today. We see kids running around, small mud houses with thatched roofs, or kids sitting down for their picnic and bickering over superfluous things. We get a very detailed visual description of rural life through which we learn of their simple ways of existence. Even the sound of the birds calling or the winds blowing are carefully recorded to set the mood of the film right. We see the annoyed look on the neighbor's face as they throw a sneaky remark at her mother. Durga, too little to understand anything, goes on doing whatever she was doing, not comprehending the unfair politics of such situations. We also learn later that the land actually belonged to her father, but because he owed his relative some money and was not able to repay the amount, he was compelled to part with the land. Full of life and spirit, she is often lost in the recesses of the woods, and despite her mother's complaints about not being enough dedicated to household works like other girls of her age, we don't see much change in her. It is important to note that, unlike her brother, she doesn't go to school. It's life's work. Though for Durga, her circumstances have never gotten in her way of her happiness. We see her tease Opu, go around playing with her friends. But soon when the realization hits her, she probably will never get married like her friend because her parents don't have enough money. In reality, she is wholly aware of the abysmal state of affairs at her house and at once confesses to her friend that she will not marry. We see her crestfallen with tears in her eyes as she witnesses her friend getting married, slowly the realization creeping in that she will probably never be a bride, and thus she'll never be able to escape from the poverty and humiliation that envelops her life. Durga's death hits her like a colossal, and all her desires end with it. Sarbaja's life is a difficult one. Nobody realizes the problem that comes with poverty better than her. She has to provide for a family when there is no money for it. Keeping aside her own desire, we see her play the role of the sacrificial mother whose path is filled with immense difficulty and ends in the tragedy which we get to witness in the film Aparajito.
The story of Pather Panchali is one that I have been in love with since I was a kid, so it almost feels sacrilegious for me to try and analyze it. My mother had read Vibhuti Bhushan's novel Amatir Bhepu as a bedtime stories to me even before I could read on my own, and once I could read, I read those stories again and then again. So even before I watched the movie, that brother and the sister, their playful routines, that narrow road that leads to the village of Nishchindipur, they had all been part of my life. I knew Upu and Durga as people and not characters.
It was emotional. The rich and the poor, the laughter and the tears, the beauty of the countryside and the grimness of poverty existing in it. Finally, I had the 2 natural halves of the story culminating in 2 poignant deaths. What more could a scenarist want?
Pather Panchali can be interpreted to be about many things, but it is the characters and their humanity that leaves a mark on you. I feel like I know Durga, I feel like I know Sarbaja, and I feel like I know a Harihar. It can be a story of any poor household in Bengal, and I guess that's what is meant by the Indian experience. We have seen this life somewhere, even if we haven't lived it. Satyajit Ray gives a lot of the film's credit to Vibhuti Bhushan himself, and he honestly deserves it since all of it comes from his writing. But Ray also makes the best choice at every step along the way to adapt the material. Ray didn't write a script for the film and rather decided to stick with the lines from the book, as he felt they were very lifelike. But he had to draw and create extensive storyboards beforehand because the way Ray had planned to shoot it, the visual language was unknown to Indians at that point. Vibhuti Bhushan's novel is more of an episodic affair. There are no clear acts and it is rambling to a certain extent. Ray, while maintaining this rambling quality, also changes the order of events in the story to streamline the script and give it more of a 3-act structure with classic build-up. He does so by developing a relationship of cause and effect within the story to have a better flow. He also omits out
Partially, there was really no script as such. There were notes and things like that, and I had it all in my head. I mean, there were notes for dialogue. Most of the dialogue came from the book. I didn't know how to write dialogue. I didn't have any confidence as a dialogue writer at that point. But fortunately, Vibhuti Bhushan wrote very lifelike dialogue.
As I said, Pather Panchali is a very visually rich movie, and films by its nature are a visual medium. The character of Oppu, for example. Despite being the lead character of this entire trilogy, Oppu barely gets any lines in the movie. In fact, the original novel is written from Oppu's perspective, so a lot of it takes place in his head. But here, despite not having as many lines, he is equally well developed. Ray does this entirely through, and it is all prevalent here. In every scene, it is so cleverly positioned that one look into the young Oppu's eyes conveys what he is feeling. You know when he is staring in wonder and when he is hiding his fear. And after his sister's death, when we get a close-up on Oppu's face, we realize he has undergone a change. He has lost the innocence in his eyes, and it is further revealed in his stride and mannerisms following death.
The idea of using details came, well, firstly from other films, from films which I admired, and also from Vibhuti Bhushan himself, the writer of Pather Panchali. He is a writer who uses details like this often, very often, in a very effective sort of way, and which are very, very cinematic.
Vibhuti Bhushan is a writer known for his love for nature. Ray uses this quality of
Otherwise, the falsity of this dream is shattered completely in all the 3 films, part by part. The train is thus a harbinger of death in the trilogy, a very conscious choice from Ray's part. In Pather Panchali, the chuffing of the engine and the whistle sounds are heard by Oppu right before Indira's death. We hear the mention of the train by Durga while she expresses to Oppu her desire to go ride the train with him moments before she dies. In the book, know the truth. We never for once see Oppu mourn his sister's death, nor do we see him mourn his parents' death in Aparajita. Death in this trilogy, like in real life, though in the most twisted fashion, teaches Oppu the most important lesson.
As Oppu boards the train and leaves the village behind, all he can think of is his sister and her unfulfilled wish of riding the train. He pledges to himself that he will never forget her. But that isn't where Oppu's story ends. In the last paragraph of the book, in a scene of foreshadowing, Vibhuti Bhushan shows us a glimpse into Oppu's future, where he truly does keep his promise. Oppu's story has only just begun. He is yet to go through all the ups and downs of life later in the trilogy. For our next video, we will be tracking Oppu throughout the trilogy and discussing his evolution as a character. So stay tuned for that video and for more such videos to come in the future. And in the meanwhile, if you do like this video, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. It would mean a lot to us. Thank you.